This is the Schlow Library Podcast. Joining us today is Professor Margaret Brittingham, a professor from Penn State, talking with us about transforming our sterile patches of lawn into verdant habitats. Margaret Brittingham is a professor of wildlife resources in the Department of Ecosystem Science and Management at Penn State University. She currently teaches ornithology and has developed a number of publications for landowners on wildlife habitat management in forests, farmland, and backyards, which are all available on Penn State's Extension website. Margaret was awarded the Penn Futures 2019 Woman of a Lifetime Achievement in Conservation Award in recognition for her lifelong work to protect natural resources. She is also director with the Clearwater Conservancy. Professor Brittingham, thanks for speaking with us today.
Thank you.
So why should people care about wildlife?
Wildlife really enhances our lives. I mean, you think about the sort of the beauty that you can get in your backyard, seeing birds, seeing butterflies. Of course, Pennsylvania, has an abundance of wildlife. We've got people involved in hunting and birding and all kinds of recreation. So there's that whole sort of recreational side to it. There's also the connections. I mean, we're part of a larger community, and all of these pieces are working together to sort of provide a support system for us. So we've heard a lot about it with pollinators recently, that how our food supply is dependent on these. So there's all kinds of services we get from wildlife. And then finally, just as indicators of what's happening to us, as I said, we're part of a larger community. So when we see declines happening in other species, it's a message that there's something going wrong, and we're affected by that too.
You use a word there I'd like to draw a circle around, and that's community. I recently had an epiphany that will sound ridiculous, but it only recently occurred to me that the birds that visit our feeder in the mornings, the two red-bellied woodpeckers and male red-winged blackbird that I see every day, those aren't just the same species I see, but the same individuals, starting their mornings just like me, the bunch of us having breakfast together, and that realization really added a depth to my morning routine. In hindsight, it seems a bit obvious. Of course they are the same individuals, though it was a happy discovery for me, if a bit childlike.
You're right. That's funny. There's actually now a Facebook page called Birds as Individuals, which sort of gets into this whole, idea. But yes, I became familiar with that long ago when I was a grad student, and I color banded birds. I worked with chickadees and I put color bands on them. And so I knew, who red, aluminum, green, blue was and who it was mated to. And so got to know all of them as individuals. But yes, those are individuals. They're there, the ones those are your red-bellied woodpeckers. They've probably got a nest someplace back in the, in the woods near your house. And each of them working together to form that community. And it's interesting that we talk about, like birds being mated for life. And then you'll know that like if something happens and all of a sudden like, where's his mate? And then you'll see that they're coming in with a different one. And so you get to kind of know the sort of the dramas too that are involved.
So do people have an impact on biodiversity?
Certainly we do. If you think in a sort of a large scale, historically when this country was settled, when Pennsylvania was settled, we came in, we cleared the area of trees. The idea was sort of the resources were endless and you just kept kind of moving forward, and passenger pigeon at that time was the most abundant bird on earth. And we heard about, flocks of billions of birds. This, as I said, the most abundant bird on earth, and basically overexploitation, they were eliminated within a period of 40 years or something. So certainly we can have negative effects on biodiversity. We can also have positive effects. And another negative one would be, again, DDT and the effects on raptors. So certainly we can have effects. We can also have positive effects. So again, with raptors, understanding that, stopping the use of DDT in North America, we were able to reverse those trends. And now bald eagles, which when I was young, you wouldn't see a bald eagle. And it was really just an amazing occurrence. And now, of course, we've got bald eagles flying down the ridges here. We've got bald eagles associated with the wetlands here. So yeah, we can make a difference. Another example of where we've really made a difference is with wetlands and waterfowl. They, again, in the early 1900s, wetlands had been drained, waterfowl had been over-harvested, and really got into sustainable management, got a big push, really driven by the waterfowl hunters to preserve wetlands and to preserve wetlands on a national level. Waterfowl populations came back up. So I think we've got really great examples of both the negative side of what we do to biodiversity, but also the positive side and the resilience of nature if we give it a chance.
In Douglas Tallamay's often cited book, Bringing Nature Home, he paints a vivid picture of the relentless job of a parent bird providing enough food for a fledgling. If our listeners can imagine a metronome beating every minute, and on that beat, the parent has to have an insect in their beak ready for their kid in order to have the kid survive.
Right.
If the yard that bird lives in is barren of insects, the bird has to fly that much further to get that bug. If the lawns of the neighbors are similarly sterile, they have to keep flying even further. Eventually, the parent will miss enough of those metronome beats that their chick will starve. After a few bird generations of that, which is not a lot of time for us, those birds will just not be around that neighborhood anymore. So with that in mind, what can we do to make our lawns nurture wildlife?
Yeah. Well, first of all, so starting with our backyards, there are lots that we can do. And to go back just one step, talking about birds, a lot of us in our backyards are used to seeing birds coming to our bird feeders and feeding on seeds. But what people don't realize is that during the breeding season, even those birds that are feeding on seeds, and particularly seeds during the winter, are feeding on insects during the breeding season. So we have a lot of migrants that return here that are feeding on insects, but so is the black-capped chickadee, the white-breasted nuthatch, and that red-bellied woodpecker. They're all depending on insects for their young, because that's the high-protein diet that their young need. So they need the insects. So it's not like we can put the seed feeder out and replace that. Doug Tallamy, who is a entomologist at University of Delaware, has done some really interesting work in looking at native plants and native insects, and basically finding that a lot of those plants that we use in our backyards, are not supporting native insects. They're coming, we've got this sort of different vision of what a backyard should look like. And so these sort of sterile lawns and then exotic plants from other countries, and they're not supporting anything. And certainly you start with a lawn, but yes, these great big lawns, not supporting anything and taking a lot of energy to maintain. So what we can do is basically starting by reducing that amount of lawn, thinking about, what do you need your lawn for? You might want to have a little area to play volleyball. I don't know, you might want to have a place to sit out on, but you don't need those gigantic lawns, and start reducing those piece by piece and trying to reestablish native plants in those areas. And people are really getting into that now. So our whole attitudes are beginning to change, and what people see as beautiful is beginning to change. And it doesn't have to be, I think in the past people thought that meant wild, unkempt, and just looks like you're not doing anything with your lawn. But it doesn't have to be like that. You can start with a small area, getting some viburnums, some dogwoods, redbud tree, mulch around it, making it so you can still make it look very nice and beautiful and still have the little patches of lawn, but just really beginning to reduce those big extensive areas of lawn.
We will be back in a moment with Professor Margaret Brittingham. The midpoint break in most podcasts is underwritten by a sponsor trying to sell you something. At Schlow Library, our only interest is to nurture a culturally rich life in central Pennsylvania. As the checkpoint to stamp your papers for all lands fictional, we bring you our underwriters from fiction. Today's episode is brought to you by your local Spies and Youth League, who would like to remind you to start your day off with a double plus morning meal. Take that saccharin tablet, Billy. You don't want a flag during this morning's 2 minutes hate. It's simple, but do double think it. With these smart choices, we can throw our wants of yesteryear screaming into the memory hole. Don't let a missed morning's tablet turn your whole day into a face cage of rats, metaphorically speaking. So remember, take your Victory brand saccharin tablet each morning, noon, and night. If you have an underwriter from fiction you would like to see sponsor the show, send your advertisement copy to bdrain@schlowlibrary.org. That's BDRAIN at SCHLOW library.org. We are back with Professor Margaret Brittingham, talking with us today about turning our lawns into habitat for Pennsylvania wildlife. Could you explain the difference between plants that are native, non-native, and invasive?
So native plants are plants that basically have been here in Pennsylvania, North America, wherever you're talking about, have evolved with the native insects, with the native plants. Non-native are ones from other areas, and so you can talk about something being non-native to North America or to Pennsylvania or even down to Center County. Really, when North America was settled, a lot of the colonists wanted to have some of those, beautiful plants that they had in their gardens at home, and so they brought things with them. There was also, from other countries bringing things, and so those would be some of the non-native plants, and so. Non-native ones are ones that are not from here. We also have cultivars, and sometimes that's sort of a different side of all of this. But anyway, the non-native ones have not evolved here. They don't generally support those native insects. Now, a lot of times people have selected them even for that, because that means your bush is not going to get eaten by anything. It's just going to be out there. So you might as well just get a plastic bush and stick it there. It's going to do the same. So anyway, so those are non-native. Invasive species are plants that are generally non-native, although you could have a native invasive one depending on the situation, but are generally non-native, and they take over. They're aggressive. They do super well. Here in this area, things like honeysuckle would be an example of one, multiflora rose, autumn olive, Japanese stiltgrass. And a lot of times these plants have some characteristics that give them an advantage. So for example, many of our invasive shrubs green up early. So if you're thinking like when we were in early April and everything is without leaves, and then you look and you see some green, it was usually something like honeysuckle. So they've got their leaves, they're getting that sunlight early on, they're getting that, head start from everything else, and they can really take off. And the reason they're detrimental is because they then can outcompete the native species, and so they basically take over that space. What's interesting is that we've learned, and people are, we're learning all the time. And so many of these invasive plants were ones we intentionally planted. Crown vetch would be another example. It grows really fast and takes over, and so it was used for erosion control. Multiflora rose was the living fence, so it was planted because hey, it takes over, it can be a living fence, wildlife can eat the berries, and so we planted that. And that was in the, the 40s and 50s, and then we've sort of learned, well, no, that's a problem because now it takes over from all these other species. But again, yeah, so those are an example. You've got other species that are non-native, maybe non-native, but they're not taking over, and so you have them, and they may be not adding a lot, but perhaps in your yard they're fine because they got beautiful flowers in spring and you really love to see them, and that's fine. But there are others that tend to escape. Another one that people love that they don't realize is really a problem is burning bush, often called winged wahoo, but it has beautiful red foliage in the fall.
So if I walk out of Lowe's with a juniper in one hand and a barberry in another, I've walked away with 2 non-natives. With the juniper, I have a plant that will sit there and grow and maybe provide cover for an animal, but little food for it. And in the barberry, I have a plant that may well provide food, but that's a problem as is likely to get out of control in our zone.
Yeah, so barberry, so the juniper could provide, and different plants provide different things, and so juniper would provide cover. But again, this is an example of where, well, what are some of the native species that might provide a similar type of cover? And so kind of thinking like that. And actually, as homeowners have become educated now, the nurseries are beginning to become educated, in terms of which species they can do. Barberry is an example, again, sort of like multiflora rose was, of one where we intentionally planted it for a long time. And you're right, you still can buy it in places, but it's a very invasive plant that will take over. So if you go to places like the Arboretum, the woods there, they've been trying to get rid of barberry for a long time. And people say, well, then something is eating it. And yes, the birds will eat those berries, and then that's how the berries get moved around. So it's not that they don't have any food value, but it's that they take over, and then your native species, which also have that food value and support the local insects, which are that important food during the breeding season, are not there.
If listeners would like to take out the invasives on their property, is good advice to go out in early April and the first things they see leaf out, go rip them up by the roots?
I mean, yeah, in a way, yeah. And on the extension website, there are actually a number of both videos and fact sheets on different invasive plants and how to, because the first thing you want to do is to be able to identify it. So that's number one, is learning to identify them. And there's some fact sheets on that, like honeysuckle, because honeysuckle is one of the ones that really leaps out early. And then come up with a management strategy. There are, on the extension side, they've got some information on chemical treatments, or you can do the rip it out, which is what we do. Honeysuckle is one that's actually pretty easy to pull out. Some of them are more difficult, and it depends on the size of your area. You can see examples at the Arboretum in Hartley Woods. They've been working for a long time in terms of trying to get rid of the invasive plants and restore the native ones. Walnut Springs, which is close to downtown, is another example. Walnut Springs and Thompson Woods, where they've been really working on removing invasives. Then the other thing which is good to do, is to try to replant with natives at the same time, so that you've got something to kind of move in there.
This is the least scientific thing we'll hear all episode, but I just had a thought on the decline of the insect population. I remember going on long summer car trips in the early 1980s, and when we would stop for gas, the windshield and front hood would be an absolute horror show of chitin, smeared wings, and antennae. When you stop now, you've hit nothing. You've encountered no insects. I feel like anyone 25 years or younger would be absolutely astounded at what the air used to be thick with.
Yeah. I mean, major declines in insect populations for a variety of reasons, everything from the use of, herbicides and pesticides to, again, to changes in, the plants that are present, to the kind of the agricultural cropping systems, to, there are a whole variety of reasons. And then, kind of connecting that to the bird side of it. And so one of the things, when you asked me, one of your original questions was, why care about wildlife, or why should we? Birds have really been used as ecological indicators, because sometimes even with something like insects, it's harder to get a real scientific count on how those changes are occurring. Although certainly, like, your windshield measure is one of them in terms of, they're not here anymore. Birds that feed on those aerial insectivores are one of the groups of birds that have declined most dramatically. So those are things like swallows and swifts that are feeding on all of those insects that are circulating in the air. And their numbers have dropped precipitously. presumably in connection with that decline in the insects that they were feeding on.
According to the 2018 National Gardening Survey, U.S. households spent $48 billion on lawn care and gardening, which is about $503 per household. If listeners in our area had a budget of $503, how would you recommend they spend it to maximize habitat creation?
Well, I think look at where your home is and try to start restoring some of that native habitat. Take a patch and change your lawn into a beautiful wildflower garden. We have a forestry and wildlife site, which also has a whole section on landscaping for wildlife. And then you've also got the Master Gardeners, and you've got the Center for Pollinators, all of which has additional information.
So as a renowned ornithologist, according to science, which is the best bird?
What is the best bird? My favorite species is the black-capped chickadee. They are survivors. They are the flock leaders. They're the ones in charge during the wintertime. They're ones I'm very familiar with. But that's my favorite. But everybody's got a different one.
Yeah, barn swallows are close to my heart. They look like they're having so much fun out there.
Yeah. I think it's making that personal connection. And one of the things that was funny with this whole quarantine was so many people have gotten into birding now. Yeah.
Our nightly entertainment is the drama at the hummingbird feeder.
Oh, yeah.
It is a rager every night.
Ah. How many hummingbirds do you have coming to your feeder?
We've seen 8 at one time.
Wow.
There's a female who's, her name is Queen, and she will defend it against everybody.
Uh-huh. Yeah, they're very, very feisty.
So what haven't I asked you that I should have?
Well, I think people always want to know what kind of plants should I be looking for.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of think of 3 different stages. One is sort of your wildflowers, and there are lots of native wildflowers that you can get everything from. I love cardinal flower. That's a really beautiful one, but cone flowers and black-eyed Susans and Renarda. And so those are all, planting those is really, gives you a lot of positive reinforcement quickly because you've got so many butterflies that will come to those. And then you've got, and then the other thing that you've got is like hummingbirds will come and feed at the patch too, and you get lots of different bees. And so that's something that you can really see some results quickly. Another one is to start thinking about host plants for different types of butterflies. So milkweed for the monarch, but spicebush is one for the spicebush swallowtail. And so planting spicebush, which is a really pretty shrub, got beautiful red berries that the migrant birds like when they come through, but again, as a host species for the spicebush swallowtail. Viburnums, dogwoods. Winterberry holly is one of my absolute favorites, which is one that has these beautiful red berries. The Arboretum is a good local place to go and look at some of the different plants. They've got a whole planting right along their field edge on Park Avenue of the Winterberry holly. And after the leaves are off, the red berries are there. And we had like January, it'll just be maybe 10 bluebirds feeding right on that. And chokeberry is another one. So a lot of these just, different native shrubs that have really beautiful fall and spring characteristics or winter interest. Sumac is another one I like for sort of the architectural seeds. So that's one. So starting to kind of think about what you can do, small trees. National Wildlife Federation, in conjunction with Doug Tallamy, has put out a little program where you can get on it. You type in your zip code, and then it'll tell you like want to look for large trees or small trees or shrubs, and then it has them according to how many species they're host to, for how many insect species they're host to. And so you can do things like that and to kind of get an idea of what you want to.
And when you see that number, you fight your urge to have a small number. You actually want a large number. You want this to host, because I think a lot of people would think like, I'm used to looking, this is deer resistant and insect resistant.
Yeah.
You want that. You want a lot of insects feeding on this.
Right, that it supports a lot of insects. Right. Which is another, right. That most insects are very beneficial to us. There are a few pests like mosquitoes, but yes, you want a lot of them.
We've discovered a civilization of mole people living far beneath the Earth's crust. You are part of the expedition to make a long-term cultural exchange from the surface dwellers. What book do you bring for them, and why?
Well, I'm going to base it on our conversation here today, and I hope that we have a lot of other people on our team. Otherwise, I'd have to go back to some kind of Greek classic or something. But anyway, based on what we've been talking about today, Doug Tallamy's new book, Nature's Best Hope, is a really great one. And it's really based on what we've been talking about today. It's designed around the idea that we've got to start, each of us doing our little part in our little patch. And so it's talking about what you can do in your backyard, or even if you don't have a backyard, what you can do to get public parks, involved. But each of those pieces, and that really the only way we're going to make it is if we do it that way. And so he calls it homegrown national parks, instead of, thinking of like, I'm going to go to a national park. It's like, we're all going to create our own here. And I think it's really, timely again for this quarantine time, because we are all starting to look inward and looking at what we can do here. And so that's my book. It's it also talks about sort of the transition that we're in, about realizing how important we all can be with that.
Professor Margaret Brittingham, thanks for speaking with us today.
Thank you, and thanks for having me on.
Today's Poetry Nightcap comes from local author Jack Troy. This is Coaster's Route from Calling the Planet Home. Some Saturdays I'd help him fold the daily review lengthwise and then in thirds, with a tuck to form a packet 6x5. We'd coast down 2nd Street on Schwinn's, him going on about the Phillies, and our canvas bags abulge with the news of the day. Mr. Truman, in a flowered shirt at the piano, grinning over his shoulder, president of everyone's front page. I pick one out of the bag and give it a flip, sidearm, backhanded, or straight out past my ear in a blur. Corner over corner it would fly, flatten out, rise a little, slow up, and hang there, just before the plop and a little scoot under the porch swing. I learned to throw words away before I kept any. This podcast is produced by Schlow Center Region Library. Special thanks to our guest, Professor Margaret Brittingham, for joining us. In the episode description, there are links to Penn State's Extension Service that is chocked to the gills with resources and advice on living a verdant life here in central Pennsylvania. You can check out all the stuff Schlow Library has going on at schlowlibrary.org. That's SCHLOW library.org. I'm Ben Drain, your old friend and erstwhile companion. Take care until we meet again.